April and Dominic. Chapter 5. Day 2 passed, and hardly a sound from her neighbor, but when she had her feet up and ready to watch her favorite show, the noise of music and chatter began swelling to a climax. April rushed to the terrace, hoping to see the stranger again. It was something about him that turned her on. Maybe it was that gorgeous tan body holding up those long legs and wide shoulders. And he's attractive beyond belief, she thought. Maybe it was his green eyes, dark curly hair, crooked grin, and that beautiful mouth filled with white teeth, and the slight beard that made her wet with desire. He was right over there begging to be fucked, and she was standing there wanting to be fucked. They were made for each other. What could be more fortuitous than this moment in time? Something had put these two together, and now April was resisting. He's white and I'm black. How is that going to work out? She questioned. That's just like you to let an opportunity like this pass you by. You only get one chance, and when you miss it, it takes forever to come back. Her mind was pleading with her to take a chance. Take a chance on love, if not love, on something, anything. Take a chance on one night of sheer bliss by gazing into that gorgeous man's eyes as she's being held in his arms and fucked to oblivion. If not, you straddle him, place the tip of his cock over your opening and ease down on it until it's all resting inside you, and then dig your hips into his groin as you drop your nipples into his mouth one by one. Show him how you can fuck him 10 ways to ecstasy, her mind is telling her. Who gives a fuck if you find love or not? Live for once. Her mind called to her. And April didn't shout, and she didn't complain. She just stripped her panties off like the women running nude on the sand with their men chasing them, and then the screaming and laughing in the cold ocean water when the men caught them and kissed them. But she will draw a line at swimming in the ocean. Not because she couldn't swim, but because ocean water was different than swimming in a pool. April would pretend and frolic around naked until he spotted her. She glanced up to see him standing on the terrace, looking at her, with a drink in his hand, a Santa's cap on his head, wearing a pair of red, green and white shorts with a reindeer galloping around a Christmas tree, and a blonde woman wrapped around his naked hard shoulders pressed against those Christmas shorts. It didn't take much of an imagination to know that he had a hard-on under those shorts, the way the blonde was leaning into him. She wasn't nude yet, but from what April saw or thought she saw a few days ago, his hormones were raging, and it wouldn't be long before he had her in the bed, so April had to get his attention immediately. Hey there, handsome bad Santa, want to go for a swim? She added a sultry low tone to her voice. She hadn't practiced that ever. She had no need to, and it came out sexy just the way she imagined, and Santa turned and smiled at her. Dominic looked up and across at April, and she saw his eyes light up and his eyes smile, then he handed the girl his glass. The young blonde in a bikini glanced up at him, whispered in his ear, and then looked down at the glass, then over to April, as April held her bikini top by one finger and dropped it to the floor of the deck and turned away from him. Dominic turned facing her, so he could get a better look at her perfect full tantalizing ass. And then April facing him strode down the stairs slowly and carefully, holding on to the railing, giving him a worthy frontal look at her hard perky breasts and dark nipples. She knew her best assets but never used them lately. She had too much to do before she could think about a relationship. But this wouldn't be a long-lasting relationship, at best it would be a one-night stand, but she could drag it on until it was time to go and she could probably get some rest in between. Dominic's eyes were surveying April in her entirety, from her face to her stunning ebony body to her taut legs. She got a bikini wax, thinking she would need one if she was to go swimming. But the woman had convinced her to take off a little more than she wanted, but now she was thankful she had. At the time, she didn't realize she would be running around on a beach naked. Sure, I'm coming, he said, forgetting the girl standing around looking at the both of them, and then tiring and moving on to the next guy sitting with a drink in his hand. Yes, you are coming. If not now, very soon, April said with a wink, promising more than she was ready to give. But she had to keep him interested, and maybe she could get some sleep before she headed back to San Francisco in 3 days, and to her job. They both reached the sand at the same time. Dominic stood gazing on April. You are better looking than I imagined, he said. Is that all you're looking for, because you can find far prettier girls than me at your party? There's something different about you. I don't know what it is, but I intend to find out. Maybe it's because I'm a black woman, and you've never been with a black woman? Dominic stared at April with a closed smile. I may look superficial, but really I'm not. No shit, Santa. You look a lot more than superficial. You look like you are in need of a good fuck, April said, just to get him a little more committed to the night and the remaining nights that she would spend in Malibu. Why are you standing in your red Santa boxers? Dominic looked down. That's cute. Started celebrating early? April said with a snicker. He looked cute with his long muscular legs extending downward and his feet bare. Dominic hadn't noticed because his eyes were focused on April's glistening brown body. I'm naked and cold and I'm feeling a little lonely, April said to Dominic. Dominic smiled. You are aggressive, aren't you? I like aggressive women. I like women who see what they want and take it. You saw me with that woman and you didn't waste time. You let me know that I had a chance with you. Now I'm here, you're in charge. Where do we go now? It's not going to be that easy, April said in a low, seductive voice. If you want me, you will have to catch me. She turned and ran into the night, and Dominic rushed after her, dropping his Santa shorts in the sand as he ran. What Dominic didn't know was that April had been a long-distance runner in school, and even if she wasn't as fast and a little slower in the sand, she had endurance. If she could get Santa to be with her tonight and the remaining nights, maybe he would suspend the partying. Then she could get some rest and go home pleased that she had met a man that she would never have to see again. But deep down inside she liked what she saw, and he wasn't the aggressor. He enjoyed women when they went after him, because he seldom did. He had been too focused on becoming rich by age 27. He had lost the art of competing for a woman. As she ran, she could hear him behind her. Anyone else would have stopped after running a mile along the beach at night. But he kept going and going. What kind of man was he? April questioned. He either liked her, or he wanted to fuck badly, in which case tonight, he wouldn't get to have sex with her because she wasn't ready. And therefore she would literally fuck Santa, because she wasn't going to have sex with a stranger even if he caught her. At least not on the first night, especially if that was all he was after. It had to be all he was after because he didn't know her, she thought. So she didn't mind teaching Santa a lesson. Don't fuck with tired, overworked black women. April and Dominic. Chapter 6. Stop. I give up. I'm exhausted, Dominic said, panting for breath as he gave out a weak yell. April turned with a satisfied smile to see Dominic bent over and holding his knees. She trotted back where he planted his feet in the sand, to see him regurgitating everything he had eaten and drank that evening. When she slowly approached Dominic, she didn't smile, but deep down she liked to see him vulnerable. Let me help you, April said as he turned to slog into the waves of the Pacific Ocean. He leaned down, grabbed a handful of salt water and splashed it on his face. April took her hand and wiped the dribble off his chest. They faced each other. April gazed into his eyes, getting a better look at him with the large moon providing some light, and the faint LED lamp post overhead casting a shadow along his magnificent face. Damn, he's handsome, she thought. I could be in his arms right now and raking my hands through his silky curls and letting him fuck my brains out. I have no one to blame but myself. I'm always $1 short and a day late. That's what my mother would say if she were alive. They stood for that moment gazing at each other. Dominic had the impulse to kiss her, but after looking like a fool and his mouth smelling like garbage, he let that go. It wouldn't happen tonight, but he would try later. I don't know what happened to me, Dominic said, taking a deep breath and straightening up. I do. But April didn't tell him. She chuckled softly. We had better get back before someone wakes up and see us cavorting around nude and call security. This community is used to this. It happens all the time. Nevertheless, I'm cold and you're in bad shape. You need some peace and quiet, and a little rest. At least for 3 days. Dominic raised an eyebrow. He was aware of what April had done, and he wasn't going to let that sideline him. He was more determined than ever to be with her. When they reached the beach houses, a group of partygoers were camped outside in front of a fire. He saw 2 blankets on the sand, and handed one to April and stood and wrapped her shivering body in it. Then he placed one over his head and held on to her, taking her down to the sand with her fitting comfortably on his lap. Her soft, warm, naked body is leaning into him for warmth. He plants a small, quick kiss on the nape of her neck. She turns and to his surprise straddles him. Now is his chance. She can say yes or reject him altogether. He placed his hands on her thigh and then cupped her breasts as she looked into his heavenly green eyes. She had forgotten her plans. But she remembered when his finger found her clit and began rubbing it with the pad of his finger. Then he placed a finger inside her wet opening, and her head fell back as she moaned in delight. There was nothing between them to prevent him from placing his penis in her. He was hard, and if she rose just a little, he could enter her. April's moan was so satisfying and loud that it jarred her out of her dream, and she realized what was happening. No. No. She whimpered in a soft, sultry voice. We can't here on the sand in front of everyone. No one will see us. Dominic looked around. They don't even know we're here, and I doubt whether they care, he said, his voice giving out a soft moan as he rocked his hips on her butt to calm his overstimulated body. Dominic kissed April's lips and dragged his mouth to her shoulder and up her neck, and her reflex was the tightening of her legs and a moan escaping from her lips as he moved his finger around her heated opening. What if I take a shower and go to your place? Dominic said, breathless. There are too many people in my house for you to go there, it's better to go with you, he said, out of breath, wanting to feel April on his dick, and knowing that 2 women were waiting at his home eager to take him in his room and give him a blowjob. At least that's what they promised him before he left with April, but for some reason he wasn't the least interested in them. It was this brown warm body, this tight pussy which held his attention. And he didn't want to have to wait. He needed her now. I'm a little tired with all the running, April said, pushing back from him where he had to pull his large hands from her, and from her position on his erect penis. I'll just go in and get into bed. I need some rest. You should go home. Sometimes people get drunk and want to trash the place. Get rid of your company, and... Dominic cut her off. Then can I join you? He paused. In bed. April shot him a small smile. She had gotten too hot to allow this perfect, too beautiful, handsome man get next to her. Next thing she would be giving him a blowjob. Or let him whip her ass as he tied her to his bedpost, and she would say nothing but beg for more. She couldn't trust herself anymore. She wasn't used to someone like him, and she knew it wouldn't take much before she would want to sleep with him. Not one night, but every night for the rest of her life. I don't sleep well with someone in the bed. I'm used to sleeping alone, April said to him. So am I, used to sleeping alone, but I'm willing to make an exception for you, Dominic said with a curled lip and a raised eyebrow. He stood looking into her eyes. Her browns mingling with his greens. I wouldn't want you to do that. Not for me, she said, walking away when he caught her hand and turned her to face him once more. They stared at each other. It was heated. It was seductive, and it was no denying the attraction. She knew it, and he knew it. I was hoping you said you were single, he said with a satisfied glance at her. The question I should ask is, are you single? Don't I look single? Would a married man have crazy parties at his home? And fall for a woman where I run around naked on the beach? Contrary to what you think, I don't make it a habit to go nude in public and with women, but you are an exception. I would run naked with you anywhere. His smile awakened her senses, and she almost gave in to him. Well, I will have to take you at your word, Santa. He smiled. It was the way she said Santa that had him ready to throw her on a bed and have his way with her. Crawl between her legs and never come up for air. Can I come for breakfast? I don't think so. I'm going to stay in bed a little longer in the morning, and I suggest you do the same. That is, if you have a bed to sleep in. You seem to have a full house all the time. If you cook me breakfast, or I send out for breakfast for us, I promise you there will be no more parties. I'm leaving Friday and I'd like to see and be with you if you don't mind, he said, gazing at her like a lovesick fool. I'll call you if I plan to cook breakfast. April turned and sauntered up the stairs with the blanket hugging her bottom. Dominic stood watching her smoking hot ass and long legs, thinking how fucking awesome it would be to place his dick between those tight cheeks. His mouth opened slightly, and he slid his tongue across his lips like a dog waiting for his favorite snack. But you don't have my number, he said. When April reached the terrace, she turned and looked down at him. I don't need it. I'll stand out on the terrace and yell. I'm sure after all that noise with the music your neighbors won't mind me shouting, breakfast is ready. Dominic shook his head with a closed smile splashed on his face. He rushed to the bottom of April's stairs and looked up at her. All he could see was her beautiful brown eyes from the rising sun and lips that would fit his dick perfectly. Will you kiss me before I go? I'm afraid not, Santa. April gestured with her finger. His face had drool on his chin and his mouth had an odor from his vomit. He passed his hand over his mouth, cupped his hand to check his breath, and jogged up his stairs to his deck. When he reached the deck, he turned and stood looking in April's direction. She waved at him, and he trudged through a throng of hanger-ons and stepped across a group of drunk bodies lying around, with some sleeping on his deck chairs and sofas. As exhausted as he felt, he hoped there was no one in his bed, because he would climb in bed, and he didn't care if they were man or woman. He was dead tired, but first he needed a shower. When he reached his bedroom, he was pleasantly surprised that there was no one in his room. Maybe they had the decency to take the other rooms because there were more than enough bedrooms, but not enough for 40 people, but only if 10 people were in each room. But thank goodness some wanted to lie on the beach by a fire to talk and have sex. He should be doing that now, but he wouldn't give up the chase. After his shower, he looked at the clock, and it was now 6:30 in the morning. He called Jordan because there was no use sleeping now with that crowd at his house, and the sun would be on the horizon in another few hours, and the crowd of hungry guests would be in his house foraging for food. He would talk to Jordan first, and then order toasted bagels with cream cheese for everyone, and over breakfast tell the ones hanging in that there would be no more parties. Dominic opened his safe and took out his new iPhone and spoke into it. How did you know I was just getting off from my night duty? It's my night to work in the emergency room. If you had called me any later, I would be in my bed fucking my wife. This had better be important because I'm driving home now. You must be in your wife's Mercedes on the speakerphone, Dominic said, heckling Jordan. Yes, and if I was driving my old Volvo, we wouldn't be talking now. I'm tired, and what are you doing talking to me? You should be boning one of those hot California girls. The ones with the tan skin and long blonde hair. Damn, I love those California girls. She's not a blonde. Don't worry, brunettes are just as hot, or maybe hotter. Can't you talk about a woman without thinking sex and fucking her? Dominic heard over the speakerphone Jordan smack his lips with impatience. And Dominic knew Jordan rolled his eyes too. That was a quirk of his when they weren't on the same page. Dominic didn't get it. Some men are always thinking of sex and fucking. That's what young men do if they aren't running after money and women. Are you going to waste my time with bullshit? Get to the point, because there must have been a reason why you called me this time of morning, and it wasn't to discuss me driving my wife's Mercedes. She's a black woman. I think I'm in love with her. Well, you are fucked now. You know what they say. Once you go black, you can't go back. She has your nose open, as they say. Don't ask me what the fuck that means, because I have no idea. I never heard that saying. Is it another one of your old wives' tales? Dominic said, annoyed because his night had been crappy, and there were no signs that it would get any better. Seriously, Jordan? I don't know what to do. I like her a lot, and I haven't even had sex with her. Then you're royally fucked if there is such a word. If you're calling me early in the morning for advice, then you have it bad. And I surmise that she is teasing you, and if I were you, I would masturbate or fuck someone, maybe 2 women, to be able to counteract what she has done to you. I know you, and once you fuck her, that's it. My advice is don't fuck her. Is that the advice you're giving me? Don't fuck her. All I can say is a woman will open her legs for a present, and the bigger the present, the wider her legs will open. You're a rich dude, and haven't spent a dime on a woman in 10 years. Don't buy her anything outrageous. It will show just how desperate you are to get between her legs. Buy her something. Start with flowers. All women love flowers. Play hard to get with a cheap soft present. And whatever you do, don't fuck her. I can't emphasize that enough. Let her wonder about you. Let her beg for it. Do you think that will work on black women? Trust me, I know black women. But all you've been dating is white women, Dominic questioned. Does a man know that once he sees a pussy that it is to be fucked, then women are women? You've heard the song, "On the first day of Christmas my true love gave to me." Well, leave out that turtle dove shit and give her something she didn't expect. Start with the flowers. Just don't anticipate too much because black women are hard to figure out. Got to go now, driving into the garage. Call me when she finally begs you to fuck her. Jordan hung up on Dominic. Now why would I want to call you when I have sex? Dominic whispered to himself as he looked at the phone. Before Dominic climbed into bed, he called the florist. When April rose at about noon, the bell was ringing. She threw on her robe and trotted to the door. The delivery guy handed her 2 baskets of yellow roses, and then 2 more. Who are these from? She stood with her mouth open wide. It says from Santa on the card, the young man said with a closed smile as he sat the baskets down. He must like you. You don't see men sending flowers anymore. Well, if he's young. The old ones still do. He's young, April said with a broad smile. These days we just send pictures of flowers to a girl's email. Cost nothing and they're happy, the young man said with a broad smile and walked down the steps and climbed into his truck with Skillman Florist written on the side. April and Dominic. Chapter 7. Who does this kind of thing anymore? It can't be for real, April thought. The beginning of a smile lit up her eyes, and she shook her head as she placed the large basket of yellow roses around the home, after taking a sniff of the wonderful aroma of fresh flowers mingling with the smell of the early morning ocean air. It had been a long time since she had seen roses. They used to grow in her mother's garden in Houston, Texas, when she was a little girl. It was her mother's favorite flowers. After April's mother died and April left for college, her father let those precious roses wither away. Or he cut them down, she didn't know which. But she did know he was never fond of the thorns on the roses, even if the flowers were beautiful. But that was their protection, just like April's protection of being cautious about a man she liked too much and who appeared to be too good to be true. April had come across the ones that were too good to be true in her young 20-something years. Most of them were married. But that never came up with Dominic because she enjoyed his attention, but if he got too close, she would ask him up front. She can't believe Dominic is real, and she can't believe his intentions are good. She remembered how he had taken 2 women to bed at the same time. Who does that kind of thing? She wondered. Her thoughts were he had low morals, or he wasn't the right man for her. But then she has had her moments in the sexual games, so she would be the last person to judge. Maybe if she was wealthy and had nothing but time on her hands, she would fall into that trap of having and getting every man she wanted and sleeping with him on a whim. April's mind wandered back to her father and how she never took time to understand men. She felt guilty now that she hadn't been home since her mother died. But she had called regularly to check on him, and when he said that he was getting married again, she knew that she didn't want to go back to Texas. She hadn't saved enough to even go home anyway. But she hoped her Christmas bonus would solve that and the housing problem which was staring her in the face, but she didn't want to face that now. She was having too good a time now that she met Santa. Walking to the terrace holding one rose and smelling it, looking up and across at the deck of Dominic's home, she expected to see her Christmas Santa. It dawned on her that she didn't know his name. "I don't want to know," she whispered. "I will never see him again, so why should I get caught up with knowing his name? It will make him too real to me," she thought. April thought about all the reasons why she shouldn't know anything about him. For one, she will never be in Malibu again. Only if lightning strikes, and it seldom rains, so what is the probability of ever coming into this dream again? What's the point? She thought. She wasn't supposed to ever come across a stunningly handsome man who could afford baskets of roses. It was a coincidence that this would occur anyway. She was way out of her elements, and it would come to an end soon. So what's the point? It was like a fairy tale meeting her Prince Charming. That doesn't happen to people like her. She'd better make the best of these last few days. When she collected her thoughts, she glanced up and there he stood, her Prince Charming. All 6 feet of him, with broad, wide, muscular shoulders. Her own beautiful young Santa, all decked out in his red Santa hat, and a pair of loose-fitting Christmas boxers with green Christmas trees. She stared at him, and her mind went into overdrive. "Suppose he wants to know my name," she questioned. Lie to him. But it's not good to start a relationship with a lie. You don't have a relationship, April. You've just met the most handsome man in your life, and you'll never see him again. A lie is the best way. She gave in and focused at that incredible-looking man standing gazing at her, with an erotic smile she could take to bed. She was lost for words staring into his green eyes, but then she found her voice. "Thanks for the flowers," she said. Her voice soft. Her tone cheerful. She held a rose in her right hand and sniffed it, and looked across at him and smiled. "You have a beautiful smile," he said. "You should do that more often," Dominic added. She never knew how to take a compliment. She thought he was just doing this to get in her pants, and maybe he was, but at least he didn't want something for nothing. He bought her flowers. Most men don't even want to invest any time in a relationship. Or money, she thought as she took another sniff of the beautiful yellow rose. "What flowers?" "I didn't send any flowers," Dominic said with a tease in his tone. April slanted her head to the side, pursed her lips and narrowed her eyes. Who else would have sent them? She wanted to take those words back as soon as they left her mouth. Men don't like it when they think no one else wants you. They like the chase, and they like to compete for a woman. Oh well, she believed in the truth sometimes, and if he was that superficial, he wasn't for her after all. Why was she getting caught up with his games? She had to question. "Maybe your boyfriend?" "I don't have a boyfriend, or man friend, or a significant other," April said, playing into his hands. Dominic smiled and headed down the stairs leading to the beach house, and never taking his eyes off April. Halfway down the stairs he stopped. "Maybe Santa sent them," he said with a mischievous grin and raised eyebrow. "But if I had sent them, it would have been red roses." "So it wasn't me," he said with a shrug of his shoulders. "Don't know who it could have been." He stepped casually onto the sand and headed in her direction. April smiled and bit her bottom lip. He had to have sent them, she thought. Why would he deny he sent the roses? If he wanted to play that game, then she would be glad to play along. "Would Santa like to come over for coffee?" she said in her sexy voice as he stepped onto the sand. "Sure, Santa would be delighted. Let me get my shoes, and I'll be there in a second. On one condition." Dominic stopped in his tracks and looked up at her. "Nothing will happen between us." He blinked his eyes. Is she serious, he wondered? He would take his chances. "Sure. I'll agree to that." When she turned around to walk into the spacious open room and kitchen, Dominic had rushed up her stairs with his shoes in his hand, and he was wearing his Christmas shorts with trees. He had grabbed a long white t-shirt and was pulling it over his head when she glanced at him. His muscular arms strained against the white fabric, as her eyes took in every part of him down to his hard muscular legs covered with fine silky hair. "You don't go in much for Manscaped, do you?" April said. He glanced at his hairy arms and legs. "Don't get me wrong. I like the hairy look." She raised an eyebrow and slid a tongue across her lips. Dominic watched at her mouth and his cock rose. Thank goodness for the long t-shirt covering up his display of hardness and passion. Her words appeared to please Dominic, and his grin was so wide she could count every white pampered tooth. She turned and reached for a cup and poured him a full cup of coffee. He sat at the bar and stared at her hard ass and luscious cheeks hanging from under her short shorts. When she turned, she leaned over the counter, and he got a good look at her full, hard, youthful breasts. "No bra. Now I want to rub my tongue across those tits and see them rise," he thought. "She must know what she's doing to me. My penis is so hard I have to hold it to keep it from shredding my shorts." "Cream?" "No. I take it black," he said with a twinkle in his eyes. "And I like your look too," Dominic said to take his mind off his dick and her tits. Hot chocolate body poured into skimpy short shorts and a tee that's 2 sizes too small. April looked up and swiped her tongue across her lips and watched at Dominic, never taking his eyes off her tits. "I'm not wearing a bra." "I know. It's not a secret. You're a woman after my own heart," he said, placing the coffee to his lips, taking a sip and looking into her eyes. Then he shot her a mischievous closed smile and placed his cup down. "And you are a man that's oversexed. If you think that way, why did you invite me to have coffee with you?" He glared at her with his sea-green eyes, and she peered at him with her amber eyes, and their eyes locked. They stared at each other for a few more seconds without words. Then April said, "We had a bargain. And you agreed. My question to you is, do you want to keep me to that bargain? I would be willing to forego that agreement for another time." He touched her arm, moving his hand up-down. She closed her eyes because it was raw ecstasy. The sensation of his touch throughout her body couldn't be denied. Shivers followed his touch from her arm down and settled inside her. She felt aroused and flooded as her body awakened with desire for him. She opened her eyes quickly to see his handsome face staring at her. He took off the silly Santa hat and placed it on the marble counter. He had a serious, erotic look in his eyes. It was a moment that both felt deep down. The heat coursed through each one, and the longer they glared at each other, the more intense the sexual feelings grew between them. Dominic felt it deep in his groin. April could feel the moisture building between her legs. It was a moment that was like lightning striking in the most unlikely place. It was a moment when they only saw each other if they were in a crowd of people, but it was only the two of them standing looking at each other and wanting each other. Only the two of them, and no one to stop them from having the most erotic sex on the floor. On the counter. On the bed. Dominic's manhood throbbed for what he wanted and couldn't get. But he had only a few days, and he wasn't about to spend the rest of his life wondering what it would be like to crawl between her brown legs and place himself in her warm body. The silence was broken by Dominic. "You know I'm a hot-blooded young man who sees a beautiful woman that's exciting me to the point where I can't bear it. I mean, I can't control how I feel about you." There he said what he was dying to say the minute he saw her on the terrace. "Don't worry. You'll calm down and get over it. All it takes is a little control," April said, trying to sound as if she had some control. She did, but she was losing it every second she looked at him. "But I want you and I think you want me. And if I'm wrong, then say it." He stared at her, waiting for an answer. April opened her mouth, but a moan of delight passed her lips when Dominic slid his finger down her jaw and between her breasts, and then the pad of his finger rest on her nipple as his gaze met hers, and she kept his gaze. He rubbed her nipple and heard another delightful moan, and her head fell back. He found a way to cross a threshold. What would she do? This was only supposed to be fun. Just a way to fuck with him, and maybe get him to stop with the parties if she got him interested enough. But in her effort to fuck with him, he was fucking with her. He was ensnaring her in this love and sexual trap. Did he do that to those girls she saw him with? And that's when April got the notion to test Santa and have a little fun with him. "I don't enjoy sex the regular way," she said, turning her back to him and almost falling with laughter. But she controlled the giggle long enough. "You're not a..." He didn't know the correct term. "No. I'm not," she said, emphasizing those words. "But I have this peculiarity where I can't have sex unless I tie a man up and whip him first. Then I force him to eat me. It doesn't make for a long-term relationship, of course, but that's the way I get off." Dominic's mouth changed into a circle and he blew out a whoosh of air and said, "Wow." And he inhaled and an exhale. April thought she had gone too far. She shouldn't have said that or done that, but she was surprised at his answer. "If it means having you, I'm all game, even if it doesn't make for a long-term relationship." His eyes flashed at her. He would do anything to get between her legs, even agree to be tied up and whipped. Now we're getting somewhere. Kinked. She didn't expect that from him. But why didn't she? If he could lay down with 2 or 3 women, he could be into all kinds of kinky shit. Dominic had heard about women like April, but never met any. Hell, he had only met a few, but then he liked her, and what could be wrong with letting her have her way with him? After all, he may never see her again, and he might like this. He was open to a lot of things. What did he have to lose with a woman he would enjoy fucking after she tied him up and whipped him? He knew when he had oral sex some time ago that he liked that. He enjoyed being between a woman's legs and satisfying her. It made the sex better for her and for him, especially if she was happy, and he knew how to make a woman happy in that way. His problem: he didn't have enough time to devote to a woman. Sex wasn't a problem. Time was. The last woman he gave head to, she said he was a natural. She didn't have to teach him a thing. But she wasn't the right one. He was sure that April was the right one, because being in her presence made him feel free, as if he could do anything with her and it would be okay. This would be huge for him. And it would be fucking exciting, he thought. When she walked around to sit with Dominic, he scooped her up into his arms as his warm lips trailed from her shoulder to the nape of her neck. Then he said, "I want you now. If you don't want me, say so, or forever hold your peace. Where is the bedroom?" Surprised at her comment, she said, "Over there," her voice small. And he carried her into the room and lay her on the bed. She could hear and feel his heart thumping, and she became excited, but she hadn't planned on this. She hadn't planned on anything. She didn't want to be on his bucket list. At the bottom of the list, fuck black woman before I'm 30.